What do you feel when you hear this sound? Is it cold, unsettling, haunting even? This is from a song made in 2022 by an alternative folk artist named Ethel Cain called Ptolomaea, and it is by far one of the most chilling pieces of music I have ever heard. So let's talk about it. Part 1. The Birth of Ethel Cain. To begin with, we need to know who Ethel Cain is, and the musician behind her. As you probably guessed from my previous statement, Ethel Cain is a stage name used by 25-year-old artists Hayden Silas Anadonia, and when I use the term stage name, it's actually closer to a character for Hayden rather than a persona. She said on how the character came to her, "A month before my 20th birthday, when I went out and bought my first white dress, I put it on in the mirror. I could see a vision of this woman with long brown hair, in a white dress, standing in front of an old house, in a wheat field somewhere in the middle of the country. It was the strangest experience. I feel like Ethel Cain is a ghost nobody can see but me, and if I don't tell her story, she'll cease to exist." Hayden also has said that Ethel is the darkest path she could see herself going down. She also uses the character to explore her feelings and experiences growing up in the deeply religious American South, and for me, I personally resonate with that. I live in Texas. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention Hayden is a transgendered woman, and her experiences would go on to highly influence her views on said topics. Before the concept album Preacher's Daughter, which chronicles the story of Ethel Cain's character, she released 3 EPs. In 2019, she released Carpet Bed and Golden Age. While not as polished as her next 2 releases, it still has echoes of what would become Ethel's signature Southern Gothic style. In 2021, she released Inbred, her first EP released via her own independent record label, Daughters of Cain, in collaboration with Little Aaron, which also features a collaboration with Wicca Faye's Spring Eternal, which my friend Zach loves. In 2022, Hayden would release the first 3 singles from Preacher's Daughter: Gibson Girl in March, Strangers, and American Teenager in April, and finally, the release of the Preacher's Daughter album in May. The album received almost instant critical acclaim, critics praising its moody production and Anadonia's writing skills, but it was also highly praised for the overarching narrative and the story. But what is the Preacher's Daughter story about? And where does Ptolomaea fit into its narrative? Part 2. Life and Time of a Preacher's Daughter. The story of Preacher's Daughter tells the story of Ethel Cain. She is a 20-year-old woman raised in the small town of Shady Grove, Alabama in the year 1991. She is the titular preacher's daughter, and after the passing of her father 10 years ago, publicly she leads the choir and many church services. But in her personal life, she is mourning the loss of her former lover, Willoughby Tucker. The album then takes a dark turn when Ethel's current beau, Logan, an abusive and violent man, tries to rob a bank and is killed in the process, and forces Ethel to go on the run from law enforcement. After this, Ethel remembers that her father had been sexually abusing her up until his death. This pushes Ethel to leave Shady Grove for good, and this is where Act 1 ends. Side note, the song Family Tree and Hard Times are especially heartbreaking. I want to say if you're someone struggling with sexual abuse, or you know somebody who is struggling with sexual abuse, I will be providing resources in the description below. So, trigger warning for the rest of the story, as it only gets darker from this point on. In the beginning of the second act, Ethel meets a man named Isaiah, who picks her up while she is hitchhiking in Arlington, Texas. The reason why I say hitchhiking like that is because Hayden has stated on Tumblr that Ethel is an unreliable narrator, and based on some of the promotional material, namely a missing poster for Ethel saying that she was last seen being forced into a white pickup truck, it is implied that she was kidnapped, and which, seeing where the rest of this story goes, it makes more logical sense. From there, the pair go to California, and in a sorrowful turn of events, Isaiah begins to pimp Ethel out, feeding her drugs and keeping her captive in an attic somewhere in California, far away from her home. This is the point in the album where we hear Ptolomaea, and it plays a pivotal role in the story and is kind of a turning point in how things go from here. Part 3. Blessed be the daughters of Cain. So Ptolomaea is an interesting song in the album because it's the only time we hear from a character other than Ethel herself. For the haunting, pitched-down vocals placed throughout the song are meant to be the words spoken by the physical manifestation of death. Some fans think that it is Isaiah, but I don't think that fits into the narrative of the story very well. Death having a voice in this song to me adds a haunting nature, as while Ethel is drugged out of her mind and trying to escape Isaiah, it does bring in the elements of the supernatural in an otherwise grounded narrative. It's the thing that Ethel fears most. While his voice is menacing and deep, it is the banal calmness of his tone that is the most terrifying.
You poor thing. Sweet morning lamb.
Ethel also sings this song quite timidly, with slight hints of desperation building into terrified cries for help, which culminates in the most chilling part of the song when she literally screams the word "stop." The last chorus of the song is what I believe to be Isaiah's voice, repeating the phrase, "I am the face of love's rage," over booming drums and metal-inspired guitars. And the outro we are left with is a prayer from Death himself that goes as follows.
Blessed be the daughters of Cain, bound to suffering eternal through the sins of their fathers committed long before their conception. Blessed be their whore mothers, tired and angry, waiting with bated breath in a ferry that will never move again. Blessed be the children, each and every one come to know their God through some senseless act of violence. Blessed be you, girl, promised to me by a man who can only feel hatred and contempt towards you. I am no good nor evil, simply I am, and I have come to take what is mine. I was there, in the dark, when you spilled your first blood. I am here now, as you run from me still. Run then, child. You can't hide from me forever.
And holy shit, is it terrifying. The horror of Ptolomaea stems from the false hope that the song presents. We want Ethel to escape and find her freedom, but sadly, as Death states, there's nothing you can do. It's already been done. The chilling finality in that statement kills all hope we have, as the next verse represents Ethel being caught by Isaiah. And at that point, all Ethel, and us as the listener, can do is wait for her fate to be sealed. It is a song that represents how Ethel's story is a tragedy, and she does not receive any form of closure in life, as the next two tracks are meant to represent her death and ascent to heaven, coldly closing out the brief and tragic life of Ethel Cain. I want to take a minute to give context to the prayer that Death says, as it hides wider context clues to the larger overarching narrative that is being set out by Hayden through Preacher's Daughter and its supplemental material, because Hayden has stated that this is the story of three women, not just Ethel. the preacher's mother, the preacher's wife, and the preacher's daughter. The lyric, "Blessed be the daughters of Cain, bound to suffering eternal through the sins of their fathers committed long before their conception," is a reference to Ethel herself, made to reap the consequences of her father, Joseph Cain, who is implied to have had a strong and abusive grip over the women in his life, and Ethel's from the years of sexual abuse. Hayden has also stated that the Daughters of Cain is some kind of cult connected to the biblical story of Cain and Abel, but little detail has been given about them so far, so we will most likely learn something about that in the future. The next line is very telling of the overall story being told with these 3 albums, as it represents the generational trauma passed down through this line of women. Ethel is likely to have only ever known the wrath and hatred of men that only ever hurt her, and this began with her father. It's likely that the other women in her life just taught her to bite her tongue and deal with the abuse at hand because they themselves had become tired, angry, and complacent. The part, "Blessed be you, girl, promised to me by a man who can only feel hatred and contempt towards you," while in the moment represents Isaiah, could also be referencing her father, as it was his abuse that caused Ethel to seek love from men who could truly never love her back. But Mysterio, I hear the Ethel Cain stans cry out from the Amish moons. Willoughby loved her. And to that I say yes. Yes, he did. But that is what set Ethel down this harrowing path. In storytelling, there is a term called the inciting incident, which basically moves the protagonist towards their path. And Willoughby leaving Ethel was her inciting incident. Ethel clearly drove him away, as referenced in the song House in Nebraska, when she says, "It hurts worse to know that I'm the reason you won't come home." This event sent Ethel spiraling down, dating any man who would have her, and unfortunately those men became increasingly more terrifying. The last line I want to address is when Death says, "I was there in the dark when you spilled your first blood," which has 2 implications. And trigger warning for SA, because this is a dark interpretation. The first implication being that Ethel has killed someone, which is basically outright stated in the song Family Tree, when she says, "I've killed before and I will kill again." And sadly, the second one could be a very gruesome reference to her sexual assault, basically solidifying that due to the actions of her father, Ethel was always tied to this fate, which, unfortunately, in a sad and poetic way, ties back to the first line of this macabre prayer. Part 4, the end of a cycle. While Ethel dies, there is a positivity to come out of this dark tragedy, for the last 2 songs on this album show her growth from these things that she has experienced from beyond the grave. The beautiful song Sun-Bleached Flies shows Ethel reflecting on her life, reminiscing about going back to the church, and in the end she finally gets to go to heaven, and it's that house in Nebraska. She's dancing in front of the windows like she used to with Willoughby, except this time it's implied that she's doing it by herself, finally being free of the feeling of needing to be loved. The last song, Stranger, serves as an epilogue as Ethel sees what happened to her body after her death. Isaiah, after having a mental breakdown, cut her body apart and even cannibalizes some of her. She repeats the phrase, "Am I making you sick?" hoping to get one last jab at Isaiah from beyond the grave. And the outro of the song is a message to her mother, telling her not to worry, for she will see her there in heaven soon enough. And oh my god, I'm crying while feeling nauseous, and I wouldn't have it any other way. While the ending is a bit grim, it also represents another ending, and that is the ending of a vicious cycle of generational trauma. Ethel will never have kids of her own to impart this trauma onto, and it is heartbreaking that the cycle had to end with her death, but it shows that some things you can never escape without change, and even then, those crosses we bear will always haunt us. I think it's quite poignant that the first track, Family Tree, the intro, Ethel uses an analogy by saying, Jesus can always reject his father, but he can't escape his mother's blood. He'll scream and try to wash it off, but he can't escape what he's made up of. The reason why Ptolomaea sticks with me is because it is truly the darkest song on this album. It feels very heavy with the weight of finality, like it is a seal being put on your fate. It's like the song says, there's nothing you can do. It's already been done. I want to say thank you guys so much for listening. I have always wanted to make a video essay on Ethel Cain and Preacher's Daughter, but seeing how many videos there are dissecting this story, I figured it would just be better to make one specifically about this song. If you like this type of content, please leave a like and a comment. I know I've been making music for a while, but I really wanted to branch out and experiment just by talking about the music that I like for once. I want to give a huge thanks to my editor Eric, who's done a fantastic job, and a special thank you to the Ethel Cain subreddit, specifically user 5C800, who linked the Ethel Cain Cinematic Universe document, and its author Scoob DiStefano. The lore document will be linked in the description below if you kind of want to get into more of it. I wouldn't have been able to get this story together without it. Until next time, stay safe, stay happy, and keep listening to the music that you love.